Stephany, good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. Thank you for coming on the Responsible Supply Chain Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
For those who don't know who or what the awesomeness of Tealbook is, can you give a little bit of a quick origin story and a bit of your mission? Because I think your mission is quite compelling.
Yeah, so the mission is to enable any organization to have clarity and visibility into who they do business with. And that comes from having clean data that can be leveraged across the organization. It doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter the industry or the technology stack that's been implemented. Every company deserves to have better understanding of better ways to optimize their supplier base, right? There's billions of dollars for most companies that go through the source to pay process, like billions of dollars. Yeah. And that process has been really fragmented and disjointed between finance, procurement, supply chain, compliance, third-party risk, ESG teams, even revenue teams in some cases, who all need good quality information on who the suppliers are. And shockingly, still today, the majority of organizations don't really have a clear baseline on who their suppliers are. And it's been...
Why? What's that? Why is that problem?
It's amazing. I think that's one of the challenge I had when I raised capital in the early days, because people didn't believe this was an actual thing. You just assume that companies would have a really good handle on the business they do business with, and it's just not the case. And when you take a company, like the majority of our clients have anywhere from 5,000 to say 140,000, 150,000 suppliers globally.
Wow.
It's a lot of relationships. And a lot of the owners of the relationships sit across different places around the organization. And so there's one person or group of people that know more deeply what the suppliers may do and the circumstance and the context of the relationship, but it's not easily transferable. And they only know their relationship. They don't know all the other information about that supplier. What else do they do? What other entities they may own? What are they certified for on things that may not be relevant to them, but may be highly relevant to the organization? So, that's one thing, is just the sheer amount of relationships and information about those relationships. And then there's a lot of change that happens. Daily there are changes around ownerships and capabilities and companies that go out of business and certificates that get expired. And so with all this change, it's really hard to maintain. And so traditionally, companies have implemented software as a way to say, hey, I am company X. The suppliers are going to come to my intake process and they're going to put their information in my portal because they want to do business with my company. And the reality is that that's usually a function of a team that's implemented a software for a very specific use case, and then multiply that by all the different functions that implement their software to manage their use cases. And so there's an enormous amount of disparity in the intake process. And there's a lot of software that are, not connected. And so that's a high demand on suppliers, right? To come in and put information in a bunch of places times the number of customers. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah. So would you say Tealbook is it aiming to be like a network or more of a data hydration? Or
I'd say, in the past, we've always been a data company, and there was a bit of a misunderstanding as we built and try to commercialize the data where it was at with software to resolve specific use case. And so I think that the market was a bit confused as seeing us as niche solutions and having a bunch of niche solutions. Meanwhile,
I wouldn't know anything about that.
But at its core, it's always been about the data. In the past couple of years, and even more now, as we've online being focused on niche problems and really focused on being data infrastructure. And so, if you compare data like a Databrick or Snowflake to a Workday or Salesforce, we're much more on the Snowflake Databricks than the Workday and Salesforce. We're really data infrastructure, but really, really specific to vendor data.
I've heard you say, I actually think for such a difficult to explain problem, I think I've heard you explain it well. And it's been fun to watch you over the years because it's become more and more clear. Maybe that's because you're explaining it better, or maybe that's because the problem is becoming more salient or more real, or both, which is ideal for a startup like yours. But I've heard you often say used the term supply chain maturity. Could you just, for the listeners, explain how you define what supply chain maturity? Supply data maturity, not supply chain maturity. Supply data maturity. Can you explain that for the
So
listeners?
what we find is that there's four level of maturity that we see in our customers. The most mature typically resides in highly regulated companies that operate globally. And, because they're highly regulated, they had to become fairly good at understanding their supplier base. Yeah. The second one would be one that I've identified that they need data. So they probably have implemented quite a few solutions. Especially with AI right now, there's a higher demand for high quality data. And so they would be looking at investing, or they've started to invest in their data infrastructure. And then I'd say the third bucket would be the ones who have implemented multiple digital solutions and have, still probably a bias towards workflow and dashboards. They may not have still come around to think that a lot of the dependency on those investment to be good is coming from having good quality data. And so they're still going to focus on software resolving this. So we see companies, have implemented SLP from Ariba and already may have had Aravo and may have had Apex Analytics and Hicks and all these different solutions. Maybe are also jumping on the intake orchestration hype, but they're still resolving data with software. And then the fourth bucket, it's still the tactical team and usually less mature. It typically stems from leadership, not investing necessarily as much in procurement or not really understanding how to leverage those investments to drive more value. So, we're letting those companies come along a little further before we would even interact with them. They wouldn't not know what to do with data.
Do you have, I feel like in some ways, in the ways we try to describe our companies, we're trying to help people avert pain, but the pain isn't necessarily like on them this second, this quarter. But, for us, we're a risk management company. And what's risk management? It's like, well, something might happen, or you might see something, and it's a tougher sell. It's like selling insurance, right? And do you find yourself having to educate customers on the pain of bad data, and you're almost like educating them while you're also trying to create a transaction?
I think, as you said earlier in the conversation, the data problem is definitely more acute than it used to be. Back in the days, like when we used to talk about using AI to scrape data, scraping websites and database was like a weird, like really scary for procurement. So that's now evolved. I do think COVID was a huge accelerator in understanding. Yeah, sure, I have spent analytics, but it's a very small, and even spent analytics requires good data. And I'd say with AI and the demand for data quality, I think most procurement teams now would know the problem. So they recognize the problem. It's sort of how to fix it. What's the solution and how to go about it?
Maybe you can share a little bit about, maybe an example you've seen where immature supply data directly, contributed to a disruption or a risk or a cost to the business.
So many, right? And think about COVID, just the evolution of everything. There's always been disruption, right? And so those are a moment in time, or there's a reaction to something, and someone needs data. Yeah. And so during COVID,
well, is there any examples with current day, with tariffs and trade and lack of visibility in supply chains? Has that been something problems that your customers have brought to you?
Yes. Understanding where you have most exposure is really important. Like, where are your suppliers based? What's the biggest exposure? Yeah. How can you shift your supply chain if needed? And it's not easy, right? If you have suppliers that are, meeting certain compliance requirements and took 6 months to onboard, and suddenly you have to shift your supply chain. So having access to good data, one, to understand your baseline and where you have the most exposed risk, and then where to shift it to, and then be able to use that to also prepare some scenarios, right? And I think with tariffs specifically, it just kept changing. So try to stay on top of what's happening.
Would you say to that end, because we've heard a few stories like that on our side as well, where it's not I shouldn't say it's not important, but it's not it's not needed until it's absolutely needed. Like risk information, we'll get, our customers will tell us, it's like, I needed it and it was there, and I went in and did a review with my boss or with our shareholders or whatever, and the information was there. And it's almost like this: you don't need it 99% of the time, but that 1% of the time you need this information, it's 100%.
So we talk a little bit differently about, like, when we talk about a data foundation, it's less reactive. It's much more about when you're thinking about building you're digitizing procurement, and you're looking at how you build your technology stack. Where does the data flow to and from is what we're talking about to customers. And then it identify where you have gaps, or you're not getting the ROI that you expected on the investment of a certain system because of data quality issues. So all these regulatory requirements, which will not end, all the complexity, it'll just get more. And so how prepared are you, right? And if you think software will prepare you or make you, position us in a way that you're going to be able to get in front of those disruptions, it's not going to happen. And so it's a definitely a shift in mentality versus like trying to resolve. But to your point, when someone, there's a huge migration happening and there's a failure in the implementation of this new system, or there's, a regulatory demand that suddenly no one has the answer, it does at least raises the question. And then we can work back towards, like, why is this happening? We can resolve, you can get you the answer, but let's talk about the root cause of the problems. You have no data foundation.
Well, speaking of moments in data foundation, we're certainly living in a moment around AI, and what a perfect time for a company like yours, because I've heard you say that AI needs clean fuel. And you've also said that AI is only as good as the data it learns from. So maybe you can share a little bit about how business has changed for you, or how, in whatever way you want to share, with this demand on everyone's getting excited about AI, but the secret is your data's probably crap. It's probably really bad. It's very difficult to train your supply chain data on AI when you've done 3 M&As in the last 5 years and you've got 16 different systems. It's just going to hallucinate. I mean, I'm answering your question for you, but I'd love to hear.
Well, it's interesting because we're an AI first company. We've been since 2016, right? So we use AI. We've been using AI to create digital profile of businesses. And when we completely re-platform, which we've been doing for the past 3 years, this new architecture has a lot of AI embedded into it. And so we leverage AI in the way that we've built our technology to make it more scalable, to make it faster, to get it smarter. So one example is we have a AI match playground that allows a vendor master to process and match the right legal entity, right? So that's getting better and better over time, and it makes it easier to match at a higher rate and match the right legal entity without using humans to do it. And so we're AI first, but it does play, right? Like our clients are looking at leveraging these AI tools, and there's a plethora coming from DPW. Like every company sounds the same. They're all kind of building, either they're layering AI tools on top of their existing technology, or they're AI native, right? They're building applications that are more niche. But when you can't match your vendor master to the right legal entity, like, and you're trying to pull data to enrich it or do something with it, it will create a lot of misinformation. And it sounds great, but it's not real. And to have the confidence to put a tool like this in the hands of your sourcing team, and then in the hands of your stakeholders, like, you have to have confidence in your data.
Well, I mean, it makes sense how you're using AI to create value for customers. But I would imagine one step beyond that, correct me if I'm wrong, but the value that Tealbook brings in cleaning up and enhancing and hydrating their supplier data improves the customer's use of whatever AI they want to deploy across that to solve lots of different procurement, including risk problems like the ones that we solve and the people that are listening to this show. Clean data is a big blocker to being able to comply with laws, to map supply chains, to understand who owns what and who's connected to what. And I would say it's had for our customers, it's bad data has had a real cost, like literal cost to, for instance, importers into the US who are doing business with sub-suppliers they're not supposed to, but have no idea how to connect the dots. And that has material cost because their goods get detained at the border. And soon those similar goods will be detained at European borders. So there just seems to be a real need in the market for clean databases. What's keeping companies from just cleaning their sock drawer when it comes to data?
I think it's the oversimplification, right? I've heard now from multiple procurement teams who have invested. One company implemented 9 software, right? So they want to do this big digital transformation. They assess all these software, the sourcing, intake orchestration, blah, 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 right? Analytics. And when I asked about data, they said, well, it's too messy. Like we're not going to address this up front. We're going to implement, and then we're going to look into data. And it's so backwards, right? Because if you have the right data, one, you may not need all the software. You will need some software, but you may be able to consolidate. The other piece is that you shouldn't depend on the software for data, right? You can have a more interchangeable ecosystem that's connected. And the time to value, the compliance, the ROI of those systems that they've implemented would be so much better if they had this data foundation up front.
Most companies don't know what they bought from a supply. That for me, you've been in supply chain a while. I guess I can't say I'm new to it, but I'm still blown away that there isn't. It's somewhere in the system. You must have known if you bought a tractor or consulting service, but you can't tell me based on the vendor. It blows me away that is no, and then that's everywhere.
The problem is the information resides within people across global companies, right? And so, actually, it's when the first idea of Tealbook was 20 something years ago when I heard a client talk about this company she wanted me to meet and look into Binder to find their contact information. And I knew that the company was going through a huge consolidation exercise to reduce their supply base by 50%. Remember those days? Like, we're going to reduce their supply base by 50%. Mm-hmm. They spend millions of dollars with Accenture, and they're doing it based on spend and risk profiling with no data to understand like who's actually creating value. What are we buying? How many companies are we buying the same things from that could be consolidated? And that's where I was like, that's crazy to me that the information that this person had in her head about this one company that resided in her binder was absolutely unattainable by anybody else in the company. And the corporate was making this big decision to cut the supply base by 50%, which would impact this amazing company she wanted me to meet because they would never have that information.
Do you think maybe we can talk a little bit more positive about the opportunities? I
think it's an amazing opportunity. So, I mean, my view at least is that it's funny. I was thinking about writing something about this today because we were seeing more and more finance folks coming into our calls that are building spend data lakes. Yeah. And I'm thinking, is procurement missing the opportunity right now to own this? Because they can own this. This is something that they can own and they can enable, and Absolutely. It can help them, one within procurement function, get access to good data and make better decisions, build better category strategy, expedite decision, all of that. Yeah. But they can also become, and that's actually Kraft Heinz, who's speaking with us on August 6th, is talking about how she and her team are taking ownership of the data and are working now collaboratively with supply chain, compliance, third-party risk, and finance because they're taking ownership. And they partnered with Kraft Heinz corporate data team, and together they're building a data foundation to take ownership of the. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for procurement to do this.
Do you see that companies building, supply data maturity or supply chain data maturity, investing in that? Do you see opportunities and advantages for them competitively in the future? And if so, what does that look like?
Well, I love the idea of what if your data was really good? Like, what if the supplier base that you do business with was one of your biggest competitive edge, right? And people that need to make decisions every day would be enabled to make decisions. The investment you've made in technology was actually materializing the outcome that you invested the technology in. Imagine the power of a company be able to optimize that investment, we're talking billions of dollars in opportunities, right? That's right now hidden.
How? It's savings or competitive edge? Primarily
All
savings.
right, savings,
Yep.
able to capitalize on partnering with suppliers to generate revenues, mitigating risks that would be blockers everywhere in the
Yep.
organization, small risk, bigger risk, be able to diversify your supply chain really fast to ensure business continuity, give yourself a competitive edge by understanding your supply base and how it relates to your consumers or your shareholders. Like there's so many ways to leverage
Yep.
your supplier base. And even in the company, like we're hearing all these major, uphaul of data lakes and data infrastructure, but vendor data is not usually prioritized. Customer data is. All the data in the company is, but vendor data is not the biggest priority. And it always like
Sure.
mind boggle me as to why it's not one of the biggest investment, because it is, the only way you can improve your margin is to reduce your costs, right? And grow more efficiently.
Right.
And by reducing
Yep.
your costs, it's either
Yep.
people or your spend. And so just that basic,
Yep.
metrics of having better, healthier margins for the market, if you
Yeah.
optimize.
If there was one, yeah, I agree. And I know it's hard for companies to get their head around investing in a cost center, but it's about reducing the cost in a cost center. It just seems like that's such low hanging fruit and just easy, quick wins. Wins you can start to see in quarters, not decades. If there was one misunderstanding around supply chain data maturity that you wish you could fix today by waving a wand, what would that be?
Just don't do it. Like there's so many ways you can tackle this problem, but there's a lot of companies who have failed over and over again or built very expensive workaround. Like there's a chance to avoid that now. Like you don't have to do that, right? And so there's a way you don't have to spend a roadmap of 4 years to get there. The technologies has advanced so much, and the solutions have been built not just by us, but customers working with us directly and solving this problem for the market. And so that would be my advice is like, yes, think about obviously how you want to solve it and what it means for you to have a strong data foundation, but just don't do it, a way that's going to be more expensive and take years, because it shouldn't have to take years anymore. It should be a pretty fast win.
Most of the people that are listening to this work in the risk side or responsibility side of supply chains, working on ESG, trade, tariff, human rights. What type of advice would you give them in their job today that's going to help them in their, it's going to benefit them and their company in the next year?
So again, it's very biased, but I do think having a clean baseline of your supplier base and automate as much of the data that you can attach to that entity as much as you can. Because there's always going to be some work that's going to be done manually. Like there's some things you need to collect, or you need humans on the ground, like auditing a cotton farm somewhere. Right. There's just going to be companies that are going to be really niche, but you don't have to buy a niche solution for every problem you're solving or every certificate you need to collect or every possible risk. And just depending on suppliers to give you information, and third-party risk management program won't do it. It will not satisfy all the demands. And so try to automate as much as you can. And then in the intake process, if the information is mostly automated and then you need to supplement, it removes a huge burden on the suppliers and on your team to be able to fill it and be able to make sure that, the data is accurate and be able to report with confidence. And so the more you're centralizing some of that process and then you're adding on, it'll just make it a lot easier. And over time, you can continue to automate. It will never be 100%, but even if you could automate 20%, 40%, 60%, it's so much better and faster. And it's going to relieve a lot of your employees to do more strategic things and drive impact versus being in the minutiae of data.
One of the things that I try to teach my son as he's a teenager and kind of thinking about the future is, I try to encourage him to think about becoming great at one thing and being the greatest in that thing, whatever that niche thing is. And you are the OG greatest voice and knowledge that I know about supply chain data maturity. You have just Own that niche. I point everyone to you. Our audience is so fortunate to get to listen to you. If anyone wants to learn more from you or contact you, where
so
would
obviously
they find you?
tealbook.com has a lot of information. We're very active on LinkedIn, and please connect with me personally on LinkedIn,
Good.
Stephany with a Y.
Good.
And I'm always happy to have a good conversation.
Perfect. Thanks for
Justin,
coming on.
for having me.